All right, in other news, Israel is set to hit a new record high this year for shekels borrowed in mortgages. In the first 9 months of 2019 alone, Israelis borrowed 50.5 billion shekels worth of housing loans.
But the recent boom in the market is sounding off alarms for some economists who see bubble conditions similar to those preceding the crash of 2008. Well, here now with more is value creation expert Dr. Alex Coman. So my first question for you is why is everything so expensive? Why is the real estate so expensive here?
Because first of all, supply is very limited, because much of the land in Israel belongs to the government. It's very bureaucratic, so the release of land is very, very slow. And the demand in Israel is very high because Moshe Kahlon, who was the previous Minister of Finance, he basically promised he would cut prices. And so people just waited for prices to drop by, say, 30, 40%. Mm-hmm. Nothing like that happened. So everybody was holding their breath, particularly young couples. Right. They were holding their breath, living in rental apartments, paying through their noses. And now they basically gave up. They jumped off the fence. And now there's huge demand for real estate.
So are these bubble-like conditions? Is this somehow dangerous to the economy?
Okay, but if we try to arrange bubbles in a hierarchy of bubbles, thinking about the subprime bubble in the U.S., that's not what we have here. Okay. Because in the U.S. it was really reckless. People received loans that were worth 120 times the real estate.
Right, which is just
that's nothing.
Insane.
I mean, in Israel, the most you can get.
But it was also more than the borrowers could realistically pay back in many cases.
Absolutely. So that was really reckless.
But isn't that similar to what's taking place here? Because who can...
No, but here you will only receive something like 60%. I mean, if you buy an apartment, you would need to bring from home at least something like 40 or more than that. So in the U.S., you would get 120% and you'd refinance, and that's how so we can have a bubble, but it will not be dramatic as the subprime bubble. And also banks in Israel, are, because they don't repackage your mortgages and resell them as it happened in the States, they would really try to make sure that you can actually pay your mortgage back. So you can have a bubble, but it would be a moderate, tiny bubble.
Well, and it's interesting what you said before, which is just kind of that desire. Israelis have a desire to own real estate, which is actually not the same in other parts of the world, right?
Right. I mean, if you look at many places in Europe, Berlin, for instance, the great majority, something like 80% of people live in rental apartments, and there's rent control. I mean, in New York, there's rent control. You see it all over the world. So the majority of people spend their whole life in rented apartments. In Israel, it's the opposite. The idea that I live in somebody else's apartment is shocking. So everybody wants to buy an apartment, right. And the parents need to sell their kidneys to finance apartments for their kids. So it's really a mobilization of the whole family to actually get apartments owned.
So is there, what are the pros and cons of the market the way it is?
Mm-hmm. In terms of investment, especially right now?
Sure.
Well, the pros are that interest rates are very, very low. Mm-hmm. I mean, historically, we don't remember such low interest rates. I remember interest rates of 8% and 10%, and today you're talking about 2 or 3%. So it's very advantageous if you take a loan, if you don't have the money to put it up front. The disadvantage is that nobody knows where the prices are going to go from here. I mean, if there's a bubble and which will burst, by the way, I personally do not expect that to happen in the near term. But if that would be the situation, it would be really frustrating to buy apartments at a higher rate and then sell them. I think another solution, if you think about investments, is not to buy an actual apartment, but to invest in real estate investment trusts. And these are big companies that buy many, they might have shopping malls, they might have hundreds of apartments. And so you don't actually own a particular apartment, but you own shares, which makes it much more fluid, because if you have an apartment and you need money for something, you need to sell the whole apartment, which is not...
Right.
But if you're invested in a company, if you have shares, you can...
Just buy all those shares.
Exactly, just part of the shares, so you can just sell 20% of your shares. So it's much more fluid, and it's attached to the value of real estate.
Aaron, you writing this down?
I really
Show me the money.
Show me the money,
exactly.
right? So my final question for you, and if you could just kind of give us a short answer, is are the real estate prices going to continue rising here in Israel, or are we going to see something
in the
change?
Well, in the near term, definitely they are going to rise, because there was a big freeze in development. So the supply actually froze, and demand is hectic. In the longer term, they might decline. But in the near term, say 2 or 3 years ahead, It's hard to imagine unless there's something in terms of security that's dramatic. With
Right.
Lebanon, Gaza.
Yeah, that's the part that we left out of this conversation. Just some of the
that can always
fears that.
drive up or down the price depending on where it is.
Yeah.
But, all right, well, Dr. Coman, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah. Next time we're going to make the whole episode just an interview about this. So interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks
you
for
so
joining
much.
us.